The night was soaked in rain, and New York's restless streets glittered under 1,000 blurred lights. Ethan sat alone in a quiet cafe tucked away on the corner of Manhattan, his hand resting on a cup of untouched black coffee. Outside, car horns and hurried footsteps filled the air, but inside there was only the soft hum of jazz drifting through the dim room. Ethan's eyes, however, were far from the cafe. They were lost in a storm of memories written into the pages of the worn diary he held so tightly against his chest. The diary smelled of old paper and tears, its corners bent from years of being opened on sleepless nights. And on nearly every page, one name was written again and again: Selina. 6 years had passed since she vanished from his life, leaving behind nothing but silence and unanswered questions. Ethan remembered her laugh that once echoed in his ears like the purest melody, her voice that carried warmth even on the coldest days. She had been his dream, his anchor, his entire world. Then, as if the universe had grown jealous of his happiness, she disappeared without a trace. He searched, he waited, he prayed to find her shadow somewhere among the millions in this city, but all he ever found was emptiness. Tonight, as he stared at his diary, he whispered her name under his breath, and the sound broke him all over again. Raindrops beat harder against the glass windows, their rhythm like a cruel reminder of his own heart still beating for someone who might never return. Ethan closed his eyes and let a single tear fall onto the paper, smudging her name as though the universe itself tried to erase her from his life. "Selina," he murmured, his voice trembling, "do you even know how many nights I've waited for you? Do you know how many times I've died inside, just to wake up and hope again?" His words dissolved into the silence, but the ache inside his chest grew heavier. Just then, the bell above the cafe door chimed. A gust of cold wind swept through, carrying with it the scent of wet streets and forgotten dreams. Ethan barely looked up. People came and went every night. But this time something shifted inside him. He felt it before he saw it. His heart began to pound, his breath caught in his throat. Slowly, almost unwillingly, he raised his eyes. There she was. A woman walked in, her hair damp from the rain, her coat clinging to her shoulders. She carried herself with quiet grace, as though the world outside had never touched her. Ethan froze. His mind screamed it couldn't be true, but his soul recognized her instantly. The curve of her lips, the depth in her eyes, it was all too familiar, all too impossible. Selina. His hands shook so violently that the cup of coffee nearly slipped from his grip. The years melted away in a heartbeat, and he was 20 again, standing under the falling leaves of autumn, holding her hand as though nothing could break them apart. Yet here she was, sitting only a few tables away, unaware of the storm unraveling inside him. Ethan's pulse thundered in his ears as he fought the urge to speak, to call her name, to break the fragile illusion that had suddenly returned to him. Was it really her? Or was grief playing one last cruel trick on him? That night, as the rain poured harder against the cafe windows, Ethan knew one thing with unshakable certainty: the universe had given him a second chance, whether in truth or in torment. Ethan could hardly breathe. Every second felt like an eternity, his heart beat louder than the rain outside. He tried to calm himself, telling his mind that it was impossible. Selina had vanished 6 years ago, vanished so completely that even her family had no answers. How could she suddenly appear here, in the very cafe where he buried his loneliness night after night? Yet the truth was undeniable. The woman sitting across the room was her. The same delicate profile, the same eyes that once held the whole world in them. But there was something new too, an unspoken sorrow resting deep in her gaze, as if life had carved its weight upon her soul. She removed her damp coat and gently placed it on the chair, running her fingers through her wet hair. Ethan could see her hands trembling slightly, as though she carried more than just the chill of the storm. She called the waiter with a soft voice, the kind of voice Ethan had played 1,000 times in his memory. He closed his eyes for a moment, afraid that if he kept staring, his heart would shatter into pieces too small to ever mend again. He wanted to stand up, to cross the space between them, to whisper her name and ask her why she had left him to bleed for all these years. But fear rooted him to his chair. What if she didn't remember him? What if she had moved on, created a new life, buried their love like it was nothing but a foolish dream? The thought was unbearable. He pressed his fingers against the diary on the table, gripping it as though it could give him courage. Selina lifted her eyes then, just for a moment, and they met his. Ethan's entire body went cold. Time stopped. He swore he could hear the silence stretch between them, a silence filled with 6 years of pain, longing, and unanswered questions. Her gaze lingered only a second before she looked away, but that second burned through Ethan's chest like fire. He felt as though he had been seen, truly seen, for the first time in years. The waiter placed a cup of tea in front of her, and Selina wrapped her hands around it for warmth. Ethan studied her carefully, every detail a sacred relic. The way her shoulders curved slightly inward, as if she was carrying invisible burdens. The way her lips trembled when she exhaled, as though she was holding back words she could never say. She was here, right in front of him, and yet felt so heartbreakingly far away. Ethan's lips parted, his voice caught in his throat. He wanted to whisper her name, to break through the silence. But before he could, Selina suddenly looked up again. This time her eyes didn't dart away. They locked onto his, unflinching, and Ethan saw it, the unmistakable flicker of recognition. Her breath hitched, her lips parted slightly, and for the briefest moment, he knew she remembered him. And then just as quickly, she looked away. The moment passed like a knife through Ethan's heart. Her eyes had recognized him, he was certain of it, but then she had turned away, shutting the door just as quickly as she had opened it. He sat frozen, caught between despair and hope, his entire body trembling with the weight of all the years he had lived without her. It was as though life had handed him a fragile glass of water after wandering a desert, only to snatch it away before he could drink. He wanted to rise from his seat, to walk to her table, to say her name aloud the way he used to whisper it into her hair when the nights were long and the city was quiet. But fear gripped him. What if he spoke, and she denied him? What if she said she wasn't Selina, or worse, what if she admitted she was, but told him that chapter of her life was long closed? His heart had been broken once by her absence. He wasn't sure he could survive it again. Selina sat quietly, staring into her cup of tea as though the steam could hide her thoughts. But Ethan noticed the subtle details, the way her fingers tightened around the porcelain, the way her lips pressed together as though holding back 1,000 words. She was fighting something inside herself, and that war was visible to anyone who knew her soul as well as he once did. It was her, there was no question. And she remembered. He could feel it in the way the air between them grew heavier with every heartbeat. The café seemed to fade around them. The soft jazz, the rain outside, the clinking of cups, they all dissolved until there was only the distance between his table and hers. Ethan's hand hovered over the diary, his knuckles white as he gripped the edge of the table. He wanted to cross that distance, but he stayed where he was, trapped by the storm inside his chest. His entire being whispered her name, though his lips could not. Then, as if drawn by the same invisible thread, Selina's eyes rose again. This time, she held his gaze a heartbeat longer. In that fleeting moment, Ethan saw everything, her sorrow, her hesitation, her fear. But beneath it all, buried deep, he caught the faintest glimmer of something else. Something fragile, yet unmistakable. Love. And just when he thought she might stand, might speak, might break the silence that held them prisoner, Selina blinked, tore her gaze away, and pulled her coat tighter around her as though she were bracing against an invisible storm. Ethan's heart collapsed within him. She was there, but she was slipping away again. Ethan could feel the seconds slipping through his fingers like grains of sand. Every heartbeat screamed that if he didn't act now, she would vanish once more, and this time he might never see her again. His chest ached with the unbearable weight of hesitation. For 6 years he had dreamed of this moment, of finding her, of holding her, of asking why she left. And now that she was here, only a few steps away, his fear held him hostage. Selina stood slowly, sliding her chair back with the faintest scrape against the wooden floor. She wrapped her coat around her shoulders, her fingers fumbling at the buttons as though even the simplest action carried the heaviness of a secret. Etanes briscocht. She was leaving. The panic rose in his throat like a tide. He couldn't let her walk out again, not without a word, not without knowing if she had ever loved him the way he still loved her. His legs moved before his mind caught up. He pushed back his chair, the sound louder than he intended, and the entire café seemed to pause for a heartbeat. Selina froze, her back half turned to him, her shoulders rigid. Slowly, hesitantly, she turned her head. Their eyes met again, this time with no escape, no veil of distraction. Selina. The name escaped his lips as a whisper, trembling, almost broken. It was the first time he had spoken it aloud in years, and hearing it again made his chest tighten with both agony and relief. Her eyes widened. The teacup she had been holding slipped slightly in her grip, clinking against the saucer before she set it down with shaking hands. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Ethan took a step closer, his hands trembling, his voice raw with desperation. "It's you, isn't it? Tell me I'm not dreaming. Tell me you're real." His words carried the weight of sleepless nights, of 1,000 letters written but never sent, of the endless void she had left behind. Selina's lips parted, and for a fleeting second, Ethan saw tears glistening in her eyes. But instead of answering, she turned her face away, hiding the storm within her. Her silence was louder than any denial. Ethan's heart pounded so hard he thought it might break through his ribs. He reached out, his hand hovering in the space between them, desperate yet afraid to touch her, afraid she might shatter like glass. At last Selina whispered, so soft it was almost lost beneath the sound of the rain, "Why now, Ethan? Why here?" Her voice was the same, achingly familiar, yet heavy with something he could not name. The words hung in the air like a fragile thread between them. "Why now, Ethan? Why here?" Her voice trembled, and Ethan felt his knees weaken, as though the floor beneath him had disappeared. He wanted to answer, to explain that he had never stopped searching, that every night for 6 long years he had prayed for this exact moment. But when he opened his mouth, only silence came. His throat was dry, his heart drowning in the weight of all the unspoken things. Selina lowered her gaze, her lashes wet with tears that threatened to fall. She pulled her coat tighter around her as if to shield herself not from the cold, but from him. Ethan could no longer hold back. He stepped closer, closing the distance until only a single table separated them. "Selina." His voice was raw, his chest rising and falling with each shallow breath. "You vanished without a word. Do you know what that did to me? Do you know how many nights I searched for you? I thought I had lost my mind, wondering if you were alive, if you were safe, if you ever loved me at all." His voice broke on the last words, his hand pressed desperately against his chest as though it could keep his heart from falling apart. At his confession, Selina finally looked at him, and this time the tears escaped, sliding silently down her cheeks. The sight shattered Ethan. He longed to reach across the table, to wipe them away with the gentleness she once knew so well, but he forced himself to wait. He needed her to speak, to tell him what the silence of 6 years had hidden. "I did love you, Ethan." Her words were quiet, but they struck him harder than any storm. His breath caught, his world tilting on its axis. "I loved you more than anything. But love wasn't enough, not then." "Not enough," he repeated, his voice shaking with disbelief. "Selina, you were everything. You are everything. What could ever make you believe love wasn't enough?" Selina's lips trembled. She looked away, her fingers twisting in the fabric of her coat, her whole body tense with a pain she had carried far too long. The silence stretched, filled only by the rain drumming harder against the windows. Then, with a broken exhale, she whispered, "Because loving you meant destroying everything else I was trying to protect." Ethan's chest tightened painfully. He didn't understand, but in her voice he heard truth, sacrifice, and a sorrow deeper than he had ever known. And in that moment, he realized, Selina's disappearance had never been about her leaving him. It had been about something darker, something that had forced her to choose between love and survival. Ethan's breath trembled as he stared at her, unable to comprehend the weight of her words. "Protect? Protect what?" He wanted to grab her hands, to pull the truth from her lips, but all he could do was stand there, caught in the storm of her sorrow. His voice broke as he pleaded, "Selina, please. Tell me, what could possibly be more important than us? Than the life we promised each other?" Selina's shoulders shook. For a long moment she said nothing, only closed her eyes as tears slipped silently down her face. When she finally spoke, her voice was low, heavy with years of buried grief. "You think I wanted to leave you? Ethan, every step I took away from you felt like tearing out my own heart. But I had no choice. There were things happening you didn't know, things I couldn't tell you. If I stayed, it would have destroyed you too." Ethan's body went rigid, his pulse racing. He felt the ground tilt beneath him as he tried to process her words. "Destroyed me? Selina, you don't understand. I was destroyed the moment you disappeared." His voice cracked, the pain spilling out like blood from an open wound. "You were my reason to breathe. My reason to live. Without you, I wasn't alive, I was just surviving." Her hands shook as she finally pressed them against the table between them, as if bracing herself. "You don't know what my family was facing," she whispered, her eyes burning with anguish. There were debts, threats, things that could have ruined everyone I loved. I thought if I disappeared, if I cut you off completely, they would leave you out of it. That was the only way I could protect you, Ethan. The truth hit him like a storm, but it didn't soothe the ache, it deepened it. He shook his head, tears blurring his vision.
Protect me?
Selina, do you know what those years did to me? I would have fought for you. I would have given up everything just to keep you safe. Why didn't you trust me with the truth? Why didn't you let me fight beside you? His voice rose with anguish, loud enough that a few people in the café turned to look. But he didn't care. Selina's lips quivered as she answered, because if you had fought, you would have lost everything. And I couldn't bear to be the reason your world was destroyed. So I let mine be destroyed instead. For the first time in years, Ethan saw her, not just the woman he had loved, but the broken soul who had carried a burden she never should have borne alone. The sight of her pain gutted him. He wanted to hold her, to tell her none of it mattered now, that they could start again. But deep inside, he knew scars like hers didn't heal easily. The rain outside thundered harder against the glass, as if echoing the storm within their hearts. Ethan's chest heaved as he fought against the years of silence and heartache. He could no longer bear the distance between them, the space that Selina had created to shield him from pain. Without thinking, he reached across the table, his hands trembling, and gently took hers. Her fingers were cold, but her grip was hesitant, almost desperate, as though she had been waiting for this touch as much as he had. Selina, he whispered, his voice raw with emotion, listen to me. None of that matters anymore. None of the threats, none of the fear, none of the years we lost. It doesn't matter. I am here.
I am alive, and I will not let you disappear again. Whatever you carry alone, we can face it together.
You don't have to carry it alone anymore. Her eyes glistened, and for the first time, Ethan saw the flicker of hope in them, so fragile, so easily lost, yet undeniably present. She swallowed hard, her lips trembling as though forming words she could not trust herself to speak. The storm in her eyes matched the storm outside, a tempest of regret, fear, and longing. Ethan held her gaze and felt the weight of those 6 years in an instant, the grief, the longing, and the love that had never died. I don't know if I can, Selina whispered, voice breaking. I thought I had to be strong, that if I gave in, everything would fall apart. I thought leaving you was the only way to protect you, and now I don't even know if I can forgive myself for leaving. Ethan shook his head gently, brushing a loose strand of wet hair from her face. Selina, you don't need to forgive yourself. What matters is that you're here. That's all that matters. I have waited, and I have loved you every single day. Nothing else, nothing, can erase that. We can face it all. Together. Her lips quivered, and finally, after years of silence, she let out a small, shuddering breath. It was as if the invisible walls she had built around her heart were beginning to crack. Ethan leaned closer, his forehead resting gently against hers. The heat of his touch, the rhythm of his heartbeat against her own, spoke more than words ever could. For a moment, the rain outside faded into nothingness. All that existed was them, two hearts mending in the quiet of a storm-soaked café, two souls reconnecting after years of separation. Don't leave me again, Ethan whispered, voice barely audible but filled with all the power of his love. Selina's hands tightened around his, and through her tears, she nodded. I won't. Ethan's heart surged as Selina's words sank in. For the first time in 6 years, the walls between them began to crumble completely. He leaned forward, slowly, cautiously, giving her the space to pull back if she needed, but she didn't. Her tears fell freely now, and he brushed them away with the gentlest of touches, tracing the lines of her face as though memorizing every detail he had once known by heart. Selina, he whispered, his lips barely grazing her ear, I have waited for this moment. For you. For us. Please, just let me hold you. Her body trembled, a shiver not from the rain but from the intensity of the emotions long buried. Then, as if the years of pain and separation had been condensed into this one heartbeat, she leaned in, resting her head against his chest. Ethan wrapped his arms around her, holding her as though he would never let go. The world outside, the noise, the rain, the city, ceased to exist. There was only the warmth of each other, the rhythm of their hearts finally in sync after years of being apart. Her tears soaked through his shirt, and he didn't care. Each one was a release, a letting go of the past that had haunted them. I'm here, he murmured into her hair. I'm not leaving. I'll never leave you again. Selina lifted her face, her eyes meeting his, glistening with a mix of relief and disbelief. I can't believe you're really here, she whispered. I thought I had lost you forever. Ethan cupped her face in his hands, thumb brushing her cheek, and smiled softly despite the tears in his own eyes. You never lost me. I never stopped loving you. No matter what, I found you. And now we have a chance to be together again. For a long moment, they simply held each other, letting the silence speak the words neither could say. The storm outside began to lighten, the rain tapering off into a gentle drizzle, as if the universe itself was granting them permission to begin anew. Ethan rested his forehead against hers, breathing in her scent, memorizing the feel of her in his arms. I promise, he whispered, his voice firm yet tender, we will never let go again. Not ever. Selina closed her eyes, a small smile breaking through the tears, and finally allowed herself to believe it, believe in love returned, in hearts reunited, in a future that had once seemed impossible. The rain had slowed to a gentle mist as Ethan and Selina stepped out of the café, the night air cool but alive with possibility. The streets glistened under the city lights, reflecting every droplet as if the city itself was celebrating their reunion. For the first time in years, Ethan felt the weight of emptiness lift from his chest. He held Selina's hand firmly in his, their fingers entwined as though they had been made to fit together this way forever. Selina glanced up at him, her eyes still wet but shining with something new, hope, trust, and a fragile joy she had almost forgotten. It feels unreal, she whispered, her voice trembling. I never thought this day would come. Ethan smiled, squeezing her hand. I know. But it did. And it's real, Selina. We're real. And we have time now.
Time to rebuild everything we lost, together.
They walked slowly, letting the mist and quiet of the night wrap around them, their hearts speaking the words their lips hadn't yet dared. Each step was a promise, each glance a silent vow. They spoke little because words were not enough. Their presence, their touch, and their shared breaths carried a depth of meaning words could never reach. The city seemed different somehow, less lonely, more alive, as if it had been waiting for this moment too. Ethan led her to a quiet park nearby, where the puddles reflected the soft glow of streetlights. Selina leaned against him, her head resting on his shoulder. I feel like I'm finally home, she murmured. You are, Ethan replied, his arm around her, holding her close. You've always been my home.
No signes, no distance, no time, no fear, quand hiver change d'être.
For the first time in 6 long years, they allowed themselves to breathe fully, to let the tension, the pain, and the loss dissolve into the quiet night. Around them, the city whispered with possibility, and for the first time, Ethan and Selina allowed themselves to imagine a future together, one built not on absence, but on the love that had survived everything. The first light of dawn began to creep over the skyline, painting the city in soft shades of gold and pink. Ethan and Selina stood together on the quiet street, the mist from the night still lingering like a gentle memory of what had been lost and what had been found. Ethan held her close, his chin resting lightly on her head, feeling the steady beat of her heart against his chest, a rhythm that matched his own after years of longing. Selina lifted her face to his, tears glistening but no longer of sorrow. I can't believe we finally have this, she whispered, her voice trembling with wonder.
After all the pain, all the waiting, we're here.
Ethan brushed a strand of hair from her face, smiling softly. We are.
And now, we take it one day at a time.
Together.
No more running, no more hiding. You're not alone anymore.
She rested her forehead against his, closing her eyes as if sealing the moment into her memory. The past 6 years of longing, heartache, and unanswered questions seemed to fall away with the morning mist, leaving only the warmth of love returned and the quiet promise of a future shared. They walked through the awakening city hand in hand, their steps light, hearts lighter. Every laugh, every glance, every touch was a reminder that love, even when tested by time and distance, could endure. The streets, once symbols of isolation and despair, now felt like the backdrop to a story rewritten by fate, a story where 2 hearts, once torn apart, had finally found their way back to each other. Ethan looked down at Selina and whispered, no matter what comes, we face it together. Always. Selina smiled, a soft, radiant smile that held the relief, joy, and unspoken promise of years reclaimed. Always, she echoed. And in that quiet dawn, surrounded by a city that never sleeps, two hearts began again, whole, unbroken, and infinitely in love.